This film was made possible by a grant from the Douglas C. Roberts Charitable Trust. The quiet front porch of the Harding home is a respite from the summer heat today, just as it was for Warren and Florence Harding for 29 years. The Hardings' last summer in their Marion, Ohio home, the summer of 1920, was different than the rest. Noisy, exciting, exhausting. The greatest epic of my life, Florence called it. Warren Gamaliel Harding, Republican senator from Ohio, was running for President of the United States. His front porch campaign turned a modest home on a tree-lined, quiet street into a destination for more than 600,000 people from across the country. In November, he easily won the highest office and took his place in history as the 29th President of the United States. Warren Harding's journey to the White House began in tiny Blooming Grove, Ohio. The village was settled by the Harding family in 1820. Born the oldest of 8 children on November 2, 1865, Warren was the son of George Tryon Harding and Phoebe Dickerson Harding. George Tryon was a farmer and a country doctor. Phoebe was a midwife who earned her medical license in the 1890s, a rare achievement for a woman in those days. Warren spent his boyhood in the Marion County village of Caledonia, swimming in the nearby river and scrounging up entertainment with the other village boys. He worked a number of unglamorous jobs as a teen, grading a railroad bed with a team of horses, painting barns, making brooms, cutting corn, and typesetting at a local newspaper. School came easily to him, especially writing and debates. He had a keen interest in Abraham Lincoln and played nearly every brass instrument. He loved to comb the nearby fields for arrowheads. While he attended tiny Ohio Central College in the village of Iberia, his family moved to the big city, Marion, Ohio, population 3,899. Armed with a college degree, 17-year-old Warren wasn't sure what he wanted to do in life. Opportunity presented itself in 1884 when the bankrupt Marion Star newspaper was up for bid at a sheriff's sale. 19-year-old Warren talked 2 friends into splitting the price tag 3 ways and assuming the 6-month mortgage. Within a year, Harding was sole owner, and he staked his future to the fledgling Star. He was determined to breathe life into what he called his sick little kitten. Harding was steadily pushing the Star forward when he met his future wife, Florence Kling DeWolf, at a local dance. Florence was 5 years older than Harding and had grown up privileged but unhappy under the domineering hand of her father, wealthy businessman Amos Kling. At age 19, she had eloped with the boy next door. A disastrous mistake, the marriage ended in an early divorce and a son, Marshall. Kling opposed the courtship between his daughter and the handsome young publisher, but the 25-year-old Harding and 30-year-old Florence married at the foot of the stairway of their newly built home on July 8, 1891. Florence had a head for business, and she put that talent to use at the Star. She managed the circulation department and kept the books for 12 years. She also assembled and sometimes spanked a crew of newsboys who provided home delivery of the newspaper. With the Star on stable financial footing, Harding turned his attention to politics when he was 34, running for the Ohio Senate. He served 2 terms, then was Ohio's lieutenant governor. In 1910, he lost the race to become Ohio's governor and his beloved mother. Undeterred, Harding won a U.S. Senate seat in 1914. He captured the attention of the party and was chosen as chairman of the National Republican Convention 2 years later. Soon, Harding was attracting nationwide attention for his ease in public speaking, silver voice, distinguished good looks, and outgoing personality. His genuine interest in people was apparent to all who met him. Harding was content in the Senate, and Florence was happy being a senator's wife. In late 1919, though, Harding bowed to pressure from colleagues and friends to make a run at the White House in 1920. Against the odds, and with two front-running candidates deadlocked, Harding secured the Republican nomination on the 10th ballot. The convention chose Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge as Harding's running mate. The Democrats chose Ohio Governor James Cox as their candidate, along with rising star Franklin Delano Roosevelt as vice president. Like Harding, Cox was a newspaper owner. Instead of giving hundreds of speeches on the road, Harding decided to use an old-time front porch campaign, fashioned after similar campaigns by fellow Ohio presidents Garfield, Benjamin Harrison, and McKinley. Americans in 1920 were at a crossroads, despondent, mourning lives lost in the recent World War and in the worldwide flu epidemic. They were struggling to gain their financial footing in a global post-war recession. The next president would set the tone for America's new era. Senator Harding's campaign slogan, "A return to normalcy," summed up his ideas to restore balance, calling for gentle tugs rather than a complete overhaul of the American way of life.
America's present need is not heroic, but healing. Not nostrums, but normalcy. Not revolution, but restoration. Not agitation, but adjustment. Not surgery, but serenity. Not the dramatic, but the dispassionate. Not experiment, but equipoise. Not submergence in internationality, but sustainment in triumphant nationality.
Harding called for tax cuts, slicing the federal deficit, creating protective tariffs for farmers, overhauling the federal budget system, and creating more efficiency in government. He believed that America needed to address its problems and lead the world by example. Harding gave more than 100 official speeches from his front porch during the 3-month campaign, addressing crowds of 10 to 15,000 people 2 or 3 times a week. The crowds at times overpowered Marion's 28,000 population. The crowds, called delegations, represented all facets of American life: Native Americans, businessmen, African Americans, immigrants, Civil War veterans, and women who had earned their right to vote in their first presidential election. Harding recognized the power of the press. He arranged for a small cottage to be built near his house, which became workspace for the newspaper reporters descending on Marion from all over the country. Harding stopped at the shack, as the reporters called it, twice a day to answer reporters' questions. The summer was filled with excitement as politicians, Broadway stars, and athletes made their way to Marion to lend their support to Harding. Warren Harding won the presidency easily, with 60.3% of the popular vote and 404 electoral votes. And he won on his 55th birthday. On March 4, 1921, Warren Harding rode with outgoing President Woodrow Wilson from the White House to the Capitol for the inauguration ceremony. For the first time in history, an inauguration speech was amplified over a microphone and loudspeakers so the far reaches of the crowd could hear. The Hardings immediately connected with average Americans. They were outgoing and down to earth. They were accessible. Their new Airedale Terrier Laddie Boy was an instant hit, especially with children. One of Harding's first tasks was helping the disabled veterans from the World War. He authorized creation of the Veterans Bureau to consolidate all medical services newly available to the former soldiers, a first in American history. President Harding and his Secretary of State, Charles Evans Hughes, put into motion the world's first peace conference, the Washington Disarmament Conference, in an attempt to quell the world's rush to rearm following the war. The conference opened the day after Harding dedicated the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery, which the president considered a fitting lead-in to a peace conference. Harding had campaigned on the need for a leaner, more efficient federal government and a budget system which operated on a business model. Toward that end, he formed the Bureau of the Budget. When he presented a coordinated federal budget to Congress, it was the first in presidential history. In addition to his mounting workload, President Harding was visible to the public, dedicating the Lincoln Memorial, Plymouth Rock, throwing out the first pitch at a baseball game, and enjoying the antics of the children on the White House lawn during the annual Easter egg roll. In June 1923, the Hardings and several cabinet members embarked on an ambitious 6-week fact-finding trip to the western states, Canada, the Alaska Territory, the Panama Canal, and Puerto Rico. Traveling by train, the president gave major speeches in large cities and insisted on obliging the crowds at country crossroads by stopping to chat. He talked to farmers in the field on a blistering hot day in Kansas, dedicated a monument on the old Oregon Trail, and greeted Boy Scouts, students, housewives, and factory workers. He fed a bear in Yellowstone National Park. He accepted gifts from Native Americans. He was the first president to visit Canada. In Alaska, Harding gathered first-hand knowledge about the territory's natural resources in order to craft a responsible conservation policy. He met Native Alaskans, inspected a naval coal mine. He talked to workers in the fishing industry and drove the Golden Spike to finish the Alaskan Railway. When the group's return voyage reached Seattle, it was apparent that the president was exhausted and ill. His Marion physician, Dr. Charles Sawyer, announced that Harding was suffering from food poisoning. In reality, the situation was much more grave. His naval physician diagnosed an enlarged heart, among other symptoms. All other speeches were canceled, and the president's train rolled on to San Francisco. The president needed rest, and he was put to bed in the presidential suite of the Palace Hotel. He died several days later, August 2, 1923, while Mrs. Harding was reading a magazine article to him. The presidential train became a funeral train as it returned to Washington. Newspaper articles proclaimed the nation's mood as the greatest outpouring of grief since Abraham Lincoln's death 60 years earlier. The president's body lay in the East Room of the White House, then in the Capitol before its final journey to Marion. In Marion, a somber line of people waited for hours to view Harding's casket, which lay in the parlor of his father's home. President Harding was laid to rest in a receiving vault at the Marion Cemetery, with an honor guard keeping watch until a final resting place could be constructed. In December 1927, both President and Mrs. Harding, who had died in 1924, were moved to the Harding Memorial, just a mile and a half from the Hardings' home. Warren G. Harding accomplished as president most of the goals he outlined from his shady front porch in 1920, during just 29 months in the White House. Above all, he believed that all Americans are united with the same concerns and dreams, that the United States really is our common country.